everyone, dear participants of the conference in Belgrade, dear co-panelists and chair. My name is Sruti Bala. I send you my apologies for not being able to be present in person, and I convey to you my greetings from the city of Amsterdam, where I am currently based. I will get straight into my presentation to not waste time. My talk today is actually slightly different from what is announced in the abstract. It's based on an article I wrote for the South African Theatre Journal in 2021. It's an open access article and can be found online. It's titled Necessary Misapplications, the Work of Translation in Performance in an Era of Global Asymmetries. And I would like to acknowledge the important exchanges with colleagues at the University of Cape Town and University of Delhi, which informs the insights that I gained during this research process. So in my article, I examine the work of the choreographer and performer Nadia Belgrade from Ivory Coast, titled Legacy from 2015. This work has toured across various international festivals in Europe and North America, and I have seen it in Amsterdam myself. But today I will not speak so much about this performance work. However, I'm just going to kind of derive certain observations and more theoretical insights that I gained from watching this work and from observing and thinking through it in terms of the lens of performance. And I would like to focus my presentation, however, on some of the broader insights on performance and translation in the context of international collaboration, especially international collaboration involving encounters between the global North and the global South. So to sort of structure the presentation, I am numbering my observations. It's not so much as in the sense of points I have to make, but just to structure how the different sections of it. So I'll dive into it straight away. Point number one, machine translation works, among other things, on the principle of equilibrium. Now, when you type into a translation engine, the term is translated actually back and forth between source and target language until there is one evident answer. That is, until there's no further movement across the languages. So this is what is sometimes characterized as equilibrium or through back translation. However, translation in the context of theater and performance operates on rather different principles. The task here is not to seek equivalence, but an encounter between two forms that have an asymmetrical relation with each other. And this is really the core argument that I would like to, or proposition that I would like to share today, that to try to think of translation as encounter across asymmetry rather than as a process of seeking equivalence. So if we think of translation from its root sense of a carrying over, translatio, across a broader range of forms and practices, then this is closer to the understanding of the term than translation in the general sense of a linguistic translation. Point number two. Translation in the context of performance carries both pragmatic and philosophical dimensions. So in terms of its pragmatic dimension, the question of translation in performance is the question of how to achieve it. What are the dramaturgical strategies or the visual, scenographic means, musical and other means through which a script is staged and presented in front of an audience? What are the means through which a performance from one culture is carried over into another cultural context? In its philosophical dimension, translation in performance is asking how the encounter of self and other are shaped and imagined on stage, in the relations of actors and spectators, in the relation of theater as an institution to its publics, but across times and across spatial distances more broadly. Point number 3. The moment the concept of translation is employed with reference to theater, music, and performance, that is, to a form that includes but exceeds language at the same time, the concept is somehow detached from its conventional sense, and it is thus made to travel. It acquires other dimensions. It becomes what Gayatri Spivak has termed catachrestic, a necessary misapplication. So, by which she means that the term translation here, when you use it in relation to performance, is not quite fitting, but it's nevertheless necessary to use this and no other term. So we can actually speak of translation more as a form, as a kind of attitude, translational attitude, or an approach, a way of shaping encounters on stage that require it being detached from their common day-to-day usage. Point number 4. Now, obviously, such broad understandings of translation bear the danger of stubbornly being sort of lofty metaphors or empty abstractions. They are attractive, but they are messy and elusive at the same time. So when I speak of translation as catachresis, it's also to acknowledge that we depart from a kind of incommensurability in the relation between what is the source and what is the target form of translation. That is, they cannot be measured in the same way. So this is somewhat different from the banal claim of untranslatability. Rather, I am suggesting that translation implies or invites a shuttling back and forth between asymmetrically different terrains. So this should not be interpreted as suggesting that translation is about some kind of a building bridges or overcoming differences. Rather, encounter need not imply the absence of conflict or friction. Point number 5. Performance grapples with not only how something can be translated, but also on how to reflect on this process of translation. And this is, I think, something important to the theorization of translation in performance, that there is a metacritical level embedded into the work of translation. Very often, the artist's processes of translation are closely bound to the subject of the actual translated work. So it might be argued that the practices of translation and the reflection on the processes of translation are stitched together into the protocols of performance. So unlike a linguistic text, where the translator's note is usually given as an appendix or a preface to the core translated text, the performance translator's notes are woven into the textures of performance. So this implies that translation is part and parcel of the concerns of dramaturgy, how choices are made around stage design, composition, mise-en-scène, etc. So even if you think of a figure like a narrator or a commentator, who's sort of at the border between stage and audience, who's neither part of this or not part of that, this is a kind of role of a translator. But also theatrical devices such as the use of meta-commentary and compositional transparency, distance, these can be considered as practices of translation that integrate a reflection on the process of translation into the practice of translation. And we see this even, in examples in contemporary theater where with the use of surtitling, where surtitling is not just a utilitarian function with a screen with including translation, but it, in fact, performers engage with the materiality, or the screen is set and placed in certain ways. So it makes us hyper aware of the politics of translation, even as we are making use of translation as a necessity, technical necessity. In his 1921 essay, The Task of the Translator, published as the preface to his translation of Baudelaire's Tableau Parisien, Walter Benjamin refers to the quality of a text, which he calls Übersetzbarkeit, that is the translatability of a text. And Benjamin argues that there are texts that are eminently translatable, that is, they come to life and reveal potentials only in and through translation. And I think this is an important idea to keep in mind in looking at the concept of translatability as Walter Benjamin proposes, the potential of a text or a potential of an idea of a form, a practice to travel to other places and contexts, but also its kind of afterlife. What will happen to the text beyond its clinging to its original? And here is where, for me, the question of translation as doing justice arises, which brings me to point number 7. If translation in performance is bound to asymmetry, then questions of an ethical order or political order become prominent. So how do we give account? How to bear responsibility towards that which is translated? How to do justice in translation? So globalization is commonly thought of as a state of the world having overcome the need for translation. We know, of course, that is a big lie. Borders are not redundant. Communication is not possible through a common lingua franca, and there is no equal playground for all. So translation is, in fact, become a fundamental necessity, though it is fraught with difficulties and conditions of non-equivalence. So in that sense, to me, the task of the translator in an era of global asymmetry is one of doing justice to those at the most vulnerable and the most marginalized end of the stream, who tend to be rendered invisible and exploited and are exploited. So what does it mean to do justice by translation in performance? Artists from the global south who perform and showcase their work in the context of the global north undertake this risky work, shuttling across uneven asymmetrical terrains, and who are attempting to also access idioms that are not present in the canon. So for performers like Nadia Bourgret, whose work can be characterized as dwelling at the border between contemporary dance and physical theater, between performance installation, participatory art. In fact, from an African contemporary dance perspective, such genre distinctions would be irrelevant. And I find it interesting that rather than trying to insert so-called African elements into a so-called purely Western contemporary dance repertoire, her practice is about actually asserting something eclectic, a dance vocabulary that is historically shifting. So themes from the history of the Ivory Coast and other parts of Western Africa are woven in prominently into the work. And in fact, she's also contesting the dominant presence of African-American understanding of Blackness, as opposed to the relative invisibility of various parts of the African continent. So there's what I observe in the work is that in the process of traveling internationally, it necessitates a process of translation on several counts. So it's not as if the work was created originally for a homogeneous Ivorian audience, but it rather emerged in the first instance with a specific kind of international viewership in mind, namely the visitors of performance festivals in Europe and North America. I think I'm running out of time. So to conclude, I would like to support a view of translation as this kind of risk-taking work and seeking out an encounter with a radically different other. And I hope that for those who are interested and who would like to read the article, I would look forward to a conversation on how far you would agree with me on this. So for me, Nadia Bourgret's work as a translator is exemplary in doing this. Her approach is evident in the way the asymmetry between traditional performance and contemporary dance is dwelt in without being homogenized. And I think it's important in her work, it recognizes that translation as dialogue and exchange on an equal plane is not a given. It doesn't exist just like that. And because the point of departure is actually profound asymmetry. And it's engaging with encounter and communication across this asymmetry that is the work of translation. Thank you very much.